I like the whiteboard. I use that a lot. But
Sure you do.
yeah.
You think I'm going to believe that?
Yeah.
God. Come on.
Come on.
How you doing?
Good,
tired.
good.
Yeah, you've already told me.
Working on a lot of gigs. I got Thursday through Sunday this week.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome.
Back in Bandera on Saturday.
Oh, yeah?
This time it's like a classic rock, like Allman Brothers, Lynyrd Skynyrd, the band.
Oh.
It's just like guitar solos for days.
Nice. Pentatonic minor, baby.
Yeah. I mean, Allman Brothers is a little more interesting than that, actually. They do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of like Dorian scales and Lydian and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. God. God help us all. No.
It's just one of those. It's funny because the guy who booked me asked if I felt like I needed a second guitar player on the gig, and this was like a month ago. I was like, no, it'll be fine. And then I started going through the set list and learning it. It's like, whoa, this is a lot of guitar solos.
Yeah. What is the guy who booked?
His name's Paul Corliss.
What does he play?
He's just a singer.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, so he just put the band together. But
Gotcha. Is that kind of how most of the Austin sort of gigging stuff works? Is that like it's just you got a bunch of musicians and then just people sort of self-organize into a bunch of whatever needs to get done, basically?
Pretty much. There are some sort of intact bands, but that's sort of the gigging world is just like you're a hired gun kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's cool. I mean, and you said you're liking this a lot more than when you were in LA, right?
Yeah. But it's a lot of work. Yeah. Learning a 3-hour set, and it's like for this one, I'm writing out charts and everything because the songs are like surprisingly specific and difficult.
Well, yeah, and this is, especially with songs that everybody knows. It's like with Freebird, which I assume you'll probably play, right?
Actually, no Freebird. We got Simple Man.
What?
Yeah.
I guess because it's so trite now. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. But we're doing Ramblin' Man, Allman Brothers, and
yeah.
Whipping Post.
Whipping
Yep,
Post,
that's on there. That's a fun tune.
Yeah.
In 11/8 time.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yep.
That's funny. Oh, did you listen? Well, so we're gonna obviously we'll talk about the second. We'll talk about Michels' chapter from Machiavellians, but that's what we'll be talking about mostly today.
Right.
But I have a question. Did you see that Roger Waters re-recorded Dark Side of the Moon?
No. Wait, re-recorded?
He re-recorded it.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Is it terrible?
No, it's different.
My bet would be it'd fall pretty flat.
Well, it's just what are you looking for from it? Like I think most people are still going to listen to Dark Side of the Moon.
Right.
But from an artistic perspective, and I could see also just years down the line, it is kind of interesting to see like, okay, what did 20-something or I don't know, maybe they were in their 30s by the time they did Dark Side, but
probably
what did young Roger Waters, think the music should sound like? And what does old Roger Waters think the music should sound like? But it's very different. I mean, he's 81, and so he's basically just talk singing the whole time.
Right.
And it is kind of depressing because it's just, he's talking about death a lot in the album, and it's just 10 years. Have got behind you. No one told you when to run. You missed the starting gun. So like just all those lyrics when you hear old Roger Waters singing it, it just does kind of hit you differently. So, but it's a little cathartic in that sense, right? But anyway, okay. So there's Mr. X's review.
There's this funny thing. I have a thing with Pink Floyd though because I like the idea of Pink Floyd as a band and not just Roger Waters, and I feel like as time has gone on. Pink Floyd is, Roger Waters is Pink Floyd, and all those other people are like side things. Because like the Pink Floyd they did without him is pretty lame, most of it.
Yeah, Division Bell has some good stuff, but it's hard for me to tell whether I really like it just because I like
the
my dad would.
Of the Division Bell
like honestly,
had begun.
I know. I don't listen to it now, but like my dad listened to it back in the day.
The grass was greener.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah,
dude, the Division Bell, man. Yeah, And so it might just be nostalgic memory for it because I agree. It's I mean, when you can't compare it to like, Wish You Were Here or whatever, Yeah. So I definitely see that. I mean, David Gilmour, though, to your point, it was certainly instrumental to their success. I mean, they basically started having success when David Gilmour got in the band.
But it's pretty funny, like when you watch interviews with him, and he's so depressed about it too, because he'd always say, "I'd have an idea," and then Roger would say, "No, that's not right. Let's do it like this."
Yeah,
and he'd be like, "And he was always right."
Yeah. Yeah, people like that are very frustrating.
I mean, they don't. As far as I understand it, they don't like each other at all.
Oh no, they are at each other's throats now, and I mean, there's all this stuff about anti-Semitism because he's.
I've had conversations out here with musicians who are just like done with Roger Waters.
Right, and so it got pretty because I follow Roger Waters and David Gilmour on Instagram. And just like a year ago, they were going back and forth. I think actually David Gilmour's wife was going after Roger Waters. So it's just a whole thing. Yeah, I agree. It's just like, okay, everybody else just wants to see him get along because they just want to go hear Pink Floyd.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we got to the bottom of that.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, talking about dictatorial people, right? Because, I mean, this is the law of oligarchy, right?
Right.
And also they had this whole thing about Bonapartism, which is basically a type of despotism that Burnham would classify Mao and Stalin and all that as.
Right.
Sort of, they come across as if they're democratically elected, but then they sort of use that to be despots because they say, we're fulfilling the will of the people.
Right.
So, anyway, I don't know. Do you want to?
Michels, is it Michels? Yeah. I was just the whole time I was wondering about the pronunciation of
probably
it.
Michel. I don't know.
Right, because he's Italian.
Yeah. Well, he's German, and then he spent most of his time in Italy.
But his name's Roberto.
Yeah, I think it says German, but it doesn't matter.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, he's a German named Roberto.
Maybe he was born. Yeah. Okay. German-born Italian, so he was born in Germany. But yeah.
Right. He was an Italian. He was an Itai.
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started reading a supplemental. I started reading one of his essays, actually, called Eugenics in Party Organization.
Was it good?
I haven't finished it. It's I think it has to do with like breeding leaders. He's definitely a fascist. He joined the fascist party. Yeah.
Right. No, it's funny because I'm looking at his Wikipedia. He belonged to the Italian school of elitism, and he's best known for his political parties book, which is basically what James Burnham is analyzing in this, which contains the description of the iron law of oligarchy, which we'll talk about here. He was a friend and disciple of Max Weber.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so
I would say that reading this one, I more or less agree with a number of his assertions, and I think that he and I would end up in a different place.
Yeah, well, I'm especially interested in your opinion about anarchy. Like he thing about anarchy.
His little bit on anarchy.
Yeah.
I think he's right in the extreme. I think that my brand of anarchy is not a total anarchy. It's not. Yeah. It's not that there's no organizational principles in any aspect of society. It has specifically to do with there not being governmental forms of leadership. Not that there is no form of leadership anywhere.
Right.
And so when I was reading that, I was thinking, like, is this a straw man? Are there people who want to organize this way where there's literally no leadership anywhere? And like, I don't know, maybe like hippies and communes kind of a thing.
Yeah, Luke, or We Are Change guy. I think he's like that. So we should probably back up and explain a little bit more. I mean, do you want to try to do a summary, or I can?
Sure. I can try. I don't know if I'll hit all the points because he organized it well, but to me, it was basically a takedown of democracy maybe not. Hang on, let me reframe that. It's an argument as to why democracy cannot work in principle. And then going at the different aspects of where democracy is sort of self-contradictory and fails sort of definitionally within itself. And then it talks about a few different brands of democratic argumentation that don't work. And it sort of culminates in the idea of the iron law of oligarchy, suggesting that not only can democracy not work, but all organizational systems default to oligarchy and will tend in that direction over time.
Right. And yeah, I think that was basically it. And yeah, it wasn't a takedown because at the end, Michels is basically saying how while democracy is
he kind of likes
perfect, it's the worst of the evils. It's the best of the worst, basically, and it's worth striving for. But yeah, because to your point, he sort of uses, I think, specifically like perfect democracy in its perfection. And it's more of what I think is a really interesting point was it's the scale point, which is I think what I was sort of trying to articulate when we were doing the anarchy debates, you could say, because that's the point that I think people haven't sufficiently addressed in the anarchy school. That at least I somebody may have addressed it. I'm just not familiar with it. I don't feel like we addressed it in any of the writings of this idea that I think you could have anarchy just like you could have democracy in all of these sort of pure forms on a small scale, as he sort of started the chapter out
12
talking
people,
about 12 people. You know, you can have a perfect democracy in that setting, but as soon as you start to increase the size, yes, it's not a continuous thing. It's just it is a continuous thing. It's not a discrete. Well, it's discrete in the sense that there's discrete numbers of people. Okay. Anyway,
it doesn't scale well.
Well, it's not linear, I guess is maybe all I'm saying is. As you scale it, you then run into this issue where the organization itself you need a leadership or a minority within the organization just to run the democracy.
Right.
And once you start doing that, that's when you start to fall into the iron law of oligarchy, because you have all of these factors that sort of make an oligarchy happen whenever you have organizations on a large scale.
Right.
And
I agree with respect to democracy. I don't know that I necessarily agree in in all anarchist contexts.
Well, but this is where it's like I think that you're being a little bit.
I can explain why I think it's different.
Because I don't think you've sufficiently addressed how you could have anarchy with organization. I still don't, and that's why I think it's interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes,
I think
let's do it.
You're right. But I don't think that's what I'm saying. I don't think you can have anything without organization.
Yes. So
I don't anarchy or anything. But,
so maybe we should call. Why are we calling it anarchy? Maybe that you're not an anarchist. That is the point.
Yeah. I would say I am an anti-state. If I'm being, I agree. I mean, I say this to people, and they, I say I'm not actually a full anarchist, and they go, "Yes, you are." I think it's an easy way to sort of encapsulate approximately where I am. I agree. I'm not a totalitarian anarchist because I agree. I think that leadership is an important aspect to human organization. Mm-hmm. But I'm talking about coercive leadership that I'm against. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I believe that coercive leadership is necessary for the organization of society. Well, I think that democracy is by definition coercive. Like, I'm completely anti-democracy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is it because of what he's saying, how as soon as you start to have representation, the logical end of that is the Bonapartism, where you just have...
No, not even that. I mean, I think, yes, democracy is sort of a self-contradictory idea, and I agree with where he's coming from with that, and I see his trajectory. It's more that the idea that I am called upon to be a governor of everybody else, because he's talking about self-govern. He mentions self-governing, but I wouldn't call democracy a system of self-governing. I would call democracy a system of sort of everybody governing everybody else. Because if it's a majority rule system, if it's a one vote, one voice kind of a thing, that means that I'm actually voting to control other people because I want my rules to go through.
How is that different than democracy by the people? Is that what you said? Isn't that it? You're saying you're controlling people, so
I'm not saying it's
vote-
different. I'm saying that's what I see democracy as being, and I'm against that.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So when I say self-governing, like if I'm talking about it for myself, I mean that I don't get to dictate rules for other people, and other people don't get to dictate
this is why
rules for me.
I feel like you are saying that you're against organizations. I don't see how you can reconcile no delegation and still have organization.
Because it all comes down to the coercive line. So yes, you can agree that
but
you're going to be in charge of something, and
Yes,
you'll be in charge of audio editing, and I'm not going to tell you what to do with that, and I'll be in charge of something else.
But what happens when I come across something where the delegation hasn't been exactly permitted, and I just go ahead and do something? You know what I mean? It's like there's all of the gray areas. That's the point. Is that nothing is delegated.
Well, no,
perfectly.
because there's no coercion in this.
No, but there is,
doing.
in a sense, there is coercion as soon as I do something that you're not completely knowledgeable about, and it happens to be something that you don't like. That's when coercion can come into play, right?
Maybe. Because I don't think coercion is doing things people don't like. It's forcing me to do something I don't like.
Right. And yes, so I mean, we can get into a whole thing about like the philosophy of what coercion really is, but I'm just getting at the point of the most simple level. Maybe before you call it coercion, how about that? You just have some task that's not going to be completely planned out, because you can't plan everything out that you delegate to somebody. And as soon as the person that's been delegated that task runs into that thing and doesn't ask you what you want to know, and they do something and it happens to be against what you wanted, and let's say that it, restricts your freedom, that's how you get a bunch of micro things. And when you're dealing with millions of people, this is how you get just naturally coercion's going to come out of an organization. And that's why if you're against coercion of any type, I think that you are against organization. And I don't think you fully reconciled that point, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I have to think about what you just said. If you're against coercion of any type, you're against organization.
Because you have on scale. This is why scale is so important, because when you have millions of delegations, people delegating things, you're going to get some things that have, just over time build up. And then, and honestly, again, I could see plenty of scenarios where somebody does something not thinking they're being coercive, but it happens to affect somebody that they don't even realize.
But I don't think effect and coercion are the same thing.
No, and this is I don't know what that was. This is my point, though, is that then I agree coercion can thus start to be a little bit of a subjective thing. It's like coercion can be looked at differently from a different perspective. One person's coercion might be another person's stupid mistake.
Okay.
And they just
what if we switch it from coercion to consent? Because that's what we've been talking about. Can I exit the situation? If I can, then
potentially,
it's all fine.
But it's not that clear. Like, I don't know. I mean, in the case of Chernobyl, could the people that lived in the area of Chernobyl exit the situation, even though they delegated all these tasks to give them, for this place to give them energy, and then they just fumbled it up and they decided to do whatever, a safety test when they shouldn't have, right? So it's like there's scenarios where, yes, maybe
there are externalities to people's decisions. People can make criminal decisions that force other people into situations that they haven't consented to be in. That's what, I would consider any decision that forces others to be in situations they don't consent to be a criminal decision.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, Michels.
All right. Yes, Michael. We'll keep touching on this, Santushka. We're breaking ground, I think. And this is kind of my point, is that because I don't think we disagree as much, I was sort of being serious when I said maybe you're not an anarchist. Maybe there is something that both of us fall in line with more that maybe is not even defined yet. Maybe we're forging a new system, Antushka.
I think you're right that I'm not truly an anarchist.
Criticism, democracy. I don't know. Democ-anarchy.
That's what AMX is.
Anarchy? Democ-anarchy. Okay, sorry. Yes, let's get back to Michels. I mean, so there were a lot of points that I wanted to bring up. I started a lot of stuff, so let me just go through, because I mean, he has a lot of interesting just things too, because he was being very systematic about it. He raised a lot of just points that I thought would be good to discuss. So,
a point he makes right at the beginning that I think is an important point is that when people write about democracy, specifically in the West today, there's sort of an assumption that it's a good thing. And so we should be doing whatever we can to preserve or build or maintain democracy.
Right.
And so what I think, it's interesting that he kind of comes out sort of in favor of democracy at the end, because I think it is a strange assumption that democracy is just sort of a word that means good stuff. And I think it's an important assumption to tackle, and I feel like not that many people do. And what's interesting is I feel like he says that right up top, and then he gives this whole argument, and it sounds like it's like, oh man, democracy kind of sucks, huh? And then he's like, at the end, he's like, oh no, but we should do these things to preserve democracy.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because, I agree. And Yarvin makes this point a lot, is that like for a longest time, democracy was sort of a laughable governing institution. And it was really just with the French Revolution and the Enlightenment principles that democracy really got, or I guess the Renaissance, first, but, moving in where people really started wanting it. And so I think you're right. It is an interesting idea to just address the assumption that democracy is even the best system, which I don't think they necessarily did in this. I mean, Michel, whatever his name is, probably does it in his book, but that wasn't really obviously.
Yeah, there's that little bit you mentioned about the least bad, but he doesn't tackle it that.
Right. Well, and so like, what do you think of this point that I thought was interesting and is sort of central to his point at the beginning of chapter 2 when he's laying out the ruling class? He's basically saying, and I know you like it, everybody's two fundamental things, right? This anti-formal approach leads Mosca to note, I'm sorry, this is the Mosca thing, but this is, I forgot. Yeah, I read the Mosca chapter in preparation for this. I'm sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah, because it's important, because this is where basically Mosca's putting up this idea that there's two political classes, a ruling class, which is going to be the minority, and then the ruled, which is going to be the majority. And basically it's this idea that minorities always rule majorities. That's something Mosca talks about. What do you think of that idea?
Well, if everything tends towards oligarchy, then that is sort of by definition true.
Right.
Because the CEO is always, there's fewer CEOs than there are, fry cooks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, and I certainly... also reading this, do you see where a lot of my, I think, thinking comes from the anarchy stuff? I mean, I was making a lot of these points, I think, because I read this book. Because
I think it makes sense. One thing that I think is important that a lot of people don't think about, because words take on this weird social meaning, and minority in general parlance. Tends to mean racial or ethnic minority or something like that. Not always, but minority in its literal sense, you can group anybody into a minority depending on what you're choosing the sort of the defining factor is.
Right. Yeah.
Because probably, you're pretty tall. You're probably in a minority if you think about percentiles of height. In a weird way.
Yeah. Thank you for telling everybody that, by the way.
Right.
We need to get that out. I am very tall. Thank you.
Right.
Yes.
Just nobody groups anybody that way, but.
Right. Though we should. I agree.
Right.
No, I see what you're saying, though I feel like you could say the same thing about majorities. You're just getting at the point that you just group things with
right. The reason I'm saying this is it's talking about majorities and minorities is risky because it's sort of a catch. You can do anything you want with it, And so saying that the minority will always rule the majority, it's kind of, the definition is baked into it because there are fewer rulers than there are ruled.
Well, and I think it's getting at the idea, and this is something else that I should say, because he says this very plainly in the Mosca chapter, and I think it's worth sort of stating what he says Machiavellians are. And he says Machiavellians, in their investigation of political behavior, do not accept at face value what men say or believe or write. It's like they're just looking at what do they do mostly, and like
right.
So the idea is that if you're taking that assumption at face value, they're not doing that, and that's why I think that's what he's trying to say is like everybody else during this time is taking the assumption that democracy is the best thing. We're not going to do that. We're going to just look at and what system could be being constructed that would
right. I think that he's maybe, I don't know if it's Burnham doing it. It's probably Burnham doing it because he's writing about Machiavellians. But this idea that they're just, I mean, we talked about this last time. I think he's giving a little too much credit to they're just sort of taking stock of the data and letting it fall where it may. Because they obviously have some kind of principle, something that they're going for. Because as soon as you start talking about something being better than something else, unless you're truly talking about it in a relative sense, which I don't think they are, I think that they are displaying that they have a set of values and principles, and so maybe they're using a more scientific way of getting at those values and principles. But they're not simply just taking stock of what is and describing it.
No, they're not. And we sort of talked about that.
Yeah.
Like the scientific method itself is a principle, right?
Right.
And it has an assumption that there are facts, right?
Right.
So I agree with that. But it's more of like, and this is how he posed it. I'm trying to find, he poses it scientifically with a hypothesis, and I had the hypothesis written. Where did I write it? Yes. In what ways, so this is Michel's central question.
Okay.
In what ways is the realization of democracy affected by the tendencies inherent in social organization, right?
Uh-huh.
So, and
then the answer is a bunch, right?
yes. And I'm just here, okay. And then his hypothesis basically is that we should find democracy in the unions and clubs because these are comprised of the working class. He focuses on trade unions because I think the idea is democracy is inherently taking the will of the people into account. That's sort of what you could think of democracy as, is, right? It's aggregating what everybody wants. And he's making the assumption right away that democracy isn't going to actually be found in any of the places of society. In the society of today, the state of dependence, and this is Michel's quote, that results from the existing economic and social conditions renders an ideal democracy impossible. This must be admitted without reserve. In the government itself, therefore, and in all political parties which accept in general the existing economic and social conditions, we do not and should not expect to find democracy in practice. But he says among these elements, the first place when Michels is writing, he says, but we might, the further question ensues whether, and if so, how far within the contemporary social order, among the elements which are endeavoring to overthrow that order and to replace it by a new one, there may exist in the germ energies tendencies to approximate towards ideal democracy. And so these are the unions. So this is the hypothesis. The hypothesis is that we should find democracy in unions and clubs because these comprise of the working class, and the working class are the ones where the will of the people comes from. So if the germ of democracy is truly to be found in this, quote, democratic society, then we need to study the unions as sort of the best place, which is why all of his examples are basically
but his examples of trade unions is all how they're like messed up and they're not very democratic.
Right, because he's using that to show that even within this thing that's supposed to be a pure democracy, it actually goes into oligarchy.
I think he's just like wrong.
Well,
I think he's missing.
Yeah.
I don't think he's totally wrong. I think he's right in the sense that very large organizations, it's nearly impossible for them to be sort of ideal democracies. But I don't think that social class has anything to do with it. I would say that there's two of us doing this podcast, and it's pretty close to a real democracy. I don't feel like one of us has some kind of massive authoritarian power over the other. I'm not saying it's perfect.
No,
but
it's
pretty close. And so I think that any social group they could be super rich. They could be like 8 princes, and they have a hunting club that they'd go do, and they just hang out together and go hunting, and nobody has any real power over each other. Or it can be something like a union that's designed to do something in terms of societal organization, and of course that's not going to be a democracy. Democracy I would argue, will only arise in situations where you're not talking about policy.
Yeah, but do you think unions were made to be democracies? So.
No, I do not. I think unions were made to be economically protective.
Okay. Well, we could go into a whole thing because I just don't know enough about unions, but my understanding is that they were a democratic answer to the, you could say, monarchistic practices of capitalism.
Yeah. I mean that is an understanding of unions. I actually was listening to a speech by Milton Friedman earlier this week about how the medical licensure system through the Hippocratic Oath.
Yep, I know that one.
Yeah, is essentially the oldest trade union.
Yeah, and one of the most powerful.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
That has nothing to do with democracy.
Right.
That's actually stripping democracy.
Right. No, I mean, yes, I agree. And this is what he gets at, but he's trying to say, where can we, because I think Michels actually agrees with you, but he's just trying to say, okay, we're probably not going to find pure democracy anywhere, but where are we most likely to find it?
And I think he's looking in the wrong place.
Okay.
Probably because he's a socialist, and so that's where he gravitates.
Well, yeah, and because to his point, all of these things are calling themselves, as he says, the democratic German socialists, right?
I mean, his club thing, I feel like that's closer. A friend group doing a book club is much closer to a democracy than the United Auto Workers.
Well, but this is also something that could potentially be a difference between trade unions in the U.S. and Europe, because he's specifically talking about, among what he's saying is, when Michels was writing, he was clearly talking about a lot of the Marxist socialist parties and the mass trade unions. Among these, the German Social Democratic Party and the German trade unions had attained the greatest number of influence in development. And so it's the idea, though, that they are comprised of working class people who are supposedly the majority, that are supposed to be the ones ruling the society in a democratic society. That's at least what everybody says, right? But he's just saying, okay, so let's look at this then, and see if this is actually true.
Right.
And obviously, yes, he concludes it's not, because then he uses them all as fodder to prove the oligarchy. So yeah. Do you want to move to the next one, or do you have any other sort of bones? This is chapter 1.
I mean, I guess I'm getting hung up on the word democracy here, and I feel like maybe it's a semantic thing. To me, just because two groups of people are vying for power does not mean that they are doing anything in service of democracy. And so you have a group called the United Auto Workers, and then you have a group called the Board of Trustees of whatever, Ford Motor Company, and they're battling over wages. I don't see this as having anything to do with democracy. I see it as two interest groups fighting, each for their own interest.
Yeah, I think he would see that too. I don't.
Right.
Because that's kind of what he's getting at, is the only thing to check a leadership's power is an opposition leadership.
Right.
Which you could potentially look at as the trade unions to the leadership of
Right.
Yes. So I think he might agree with that, but I don't know. Okay, so so that's actually a good sort of going into the next chapter, where they talk about how leadership is just this. It seems to be this natural tendency to acquire.
Right.
And so he uses sort of the technical reasons why you would need leadership to arise, but he also gives psychological reasons why us as people seem to also want leaders. So there's like the technical reasons, meaning like once you have an organization, you are, you basically need to have some kind of structure that runs the organization if it's sufficiently large. And so this will ultimately lead to a group of leaders that could potentially, that are going to exert more control over everybody else and also have the ability to establish an oligarchy, right? And so he uses a bunch of examples for why democracy in full fails and why it ultimately leads to leaders. So one of the reasons is there's no place big enough, right, for a sufficiently large group to have everybody come and vote on something, right? Like the U.S., like you couldn't have all 300 plus million people come into one place and just vote on it. Then there's also, and we talked about this, and the need for quick decisions in certain scenarios, the conduct of the organization is really, I think, where you then sort of get the bureaucracy, is essentially what he's talking about, is as you develop sort of rules and practices and things like that, you start to get people that know the system and then can start to establish power more, and consolidate power rather. And then this is how oligarchy forms. So all of this leads to an oligarchy. And then there's also sort of psychological reasons why we as groups tend to have leaders. And yeah, sorry, I'm just reading this thing by Rousseau that we should talk about. But let me just put a pin in this. But like just this idea, and this I think is a little bit less. It's just difficult because it's psychology and it's harder to make the argument. But he quotes like Machiavelli's Prince. Machiavelli talks about this, where you have a group of people and you kill like the captains, and then it's just the people don't know what to do until new captains are chosen to organize everybody. So there does seem to be something about us as humans that we, when we're in groups, are looking to people for authority to sort of tell us what to do. We could disagree with that. I don't disagree with it. I'm just thinking about it. Yeah. And then also like the leader themselves will become sort of have their own psychological metamorphosis, as I think he calls it. And they'll start to essentially believe in themselves more and more. He has been pushed forward by a clearer vision, by a profound sentiment, by more ardent desire. So, okay. So, and then basically, and ultimately, I think one of the fundamental psychological things that at least Burnham and Burnham highlights that Michels thinks is that he who has acquired power, this is on page 144, will almost always endeavor to consolidate it and extend it to multiply the ramparts which defend his position and to withdraw himself from the control of the masses. Right. Which I think is true, because I think you do see that with everybody, is like we all want to get good at something so that we don't have to constantly be under somebody else's thumb. I honestly think that we're all sort of trying to get a relative amount of autonomy as we get older so that we can just do something well and not have to constantly be like...
It's rough when that thing that you want to do well is control everybody else, though.
Well, yeah, it's true. No. But I'm just saying that tendency is in everybody, and why would it not be in leaders, right? Right. So anyway, okay. So I think I just wanted to sort of lay out his argument for why oligarchy forms, because I obviously think it's true. And so this is all of these points, among others, are what leads him to conclude that in any sufficiently large organization, based off of just the intrinsic qualities of organizing people, as well as the intrinsic qualities of us, all of these would lead to an oligarchy, and thus the minority would exert control over majority, and thus a pure democracy at scale is never possible.
It's not even close to a pure democracy at this point.
Yes.
Well, what we're talking about is pretty far divorced from a democracy.
Yeah, yeah. In some sense, I agree. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like when oligarchy takes over, the minority is ruling the majority. That's like the opposite of a democracy.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were saying today. Now,
no, I'm talking about this situation. Yes. This, like, this theoretical framing.
Yeah, yes, but this is where I think Michels then ends with saying that it's like, even though it's probably never possible, it is the form of government that's probably the most ideal and what we should strive for.
Because this is where I don't understand why. And yeah.
Because it's getting at this, I think and you could almost say it's like anarchy is almost the ideal, which I think what he was almost saying at the end, right? Is like the ideal form to strive for, and which I sort of agree with, is the idea of the least amount of control being exerted by others upon people, if you want to call that
right
anarchy in its extreme, where no control is being exerted on anybody. Then yes, I think that's not a bad thing to strive for. And he's saying democracy is a good thing to strive for in organizations, I think, because it's the idea is just democracy is empowering individuals to control society. And so as you can increase that more and more, that's something good to try to strive for. But yes, you're not going to get a perfect one where everybody is having the same exact say on everything.
Right.
Yeah. But you can shoot for it, and you can try to also, again, this is where people probably won't like this, but you could look at as Trump was the ultimate, sort of opposition to the oligarchy of the establishment, which is what everybody that voted for him at least appears to have said.
I mean, that's why I wrote Trump. He's even describing that exact situation about the leader that arises out of the sort of disgruntled masses ends up being their own. They end up developing their own oligarchy through that.
Right.
It's just one oligarchy versus another, which is essentially what I was saying about the trade union. The trade union versus the CEO. It's just two competing interests.
Right, and I think that's the reason I think that's significant and not bad is because I think that is basically how. That's the only way. I also don't think that's bad. Oh, okay.
I think democracy's bad. I don't think that stuff's bad.
Well, but I guess the point is. Here's one point. I think we can agree that there's no pure form of any of these. Even monarchy and democracy, everything's like a weird blend. I think government has been a weird blend of all of these, right?
Right.
All the forms, and even people don't even agree on how to break up.
I guess God would be the pure monarch.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not saying that it's real. I'm saying as an archetype.
Yes, I think so. And I mean, Aristotle basically thinks there's just, I think, 3 types of government, whereas Plato, I think, thinks there's 5 or 6 or something. I always forget.
Right.
But yeah, Aristotle just thinks it's basically monarchy, democracy, and oligarchy, or aristocracy or whatever.
Right.
And whereas Plato's got anyway. Well, it's just like democracy, but also theocracy and stuff like that.
Right.
Timocracy or whatever.
I don't know what that word is.
Yeah, I didn't either, and I've already forgotten. It's like, but this is where I disagree because it's like it is similar, I think, to a oligarchy, if I'm not mistaken, a form of government in which possession of property is required in order to hold office. So there you go. So it's what the U.S. was,
That's silly that's its own category. That's That's just a brand of another thing.
It's just a brand of oligarchy in my
right. It's just a way of doing it.
Yes, which is why I do agree with Aristotle's more fundamental breakup. Right. And then the reason I brought this up is that it does. I think we can agree that there's no pure form of any government. It's always a mixture. And probably the thing to be striving for is the most freedom for the individuals, which seems to be what democracy does, which is why I think Michels came to that.
Yeah.
And again, we can agree, we agree, I think, that there's no pure form of democracy right now, and most governments have failed at it, and that we need to keep striving for it. But
I agree up until the last point.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right, but I still don't, I'm not even convinced you're an anarchist anymore. But
I agree with you. I don't think I'm truly an anarchist. I think if you were to lay out a whole bunch of political philosophies, I'm probably closer to that than most others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and so maybe this is a good time to talk about the anarchy part, because I was wondering, you've already kind of addressed it, but I thought I'd just read on 149. Since all organization leads to autocracy, then in order to achieve democracy, there must be no organization at all, neither state nor party nor union. This viewpoint, which the history of anarchism shows is capable of producing very noble human individuals, is wholly divorced from reality of human society.
Right. I hear that. I read that, and
organizations. Yes. Which is why when I said society too, I was like, yeah, because society is an organization.
I think there's a he's smuggling democracy into anarchy. Anarchy doesn't have to be democracy. In fact,
that's a very interesting question, because I wonder if it's in its pure form. It is. If everybody's consented to voting and agreeing that whatever the vote outcome is, you'll go along with, then that seems
fine.
to be...
That's possible. I'm not saying that you can't have kind of an anarchistic democracy. I'm saying that they aren't. You can also have a non-democratic anarchist system where nobody has any rule over anybody else. I'm not saying that this is I'm not saying that's what you want or whatever. I'm just, in theory.
Right. But in my head, that would be something you wouldn't want, right? You would actually probably want a more democratic anarchistic society.
I don't know.
Well, I think you would, because it seems to combine what you're saying of, sort of not coercing other people to do stuff.
I'm slightly. So you got this book. There's the idea from the book from Curtis Yarvin. I wonder where he falls on these chapters and things like that, because I'm at least interested in the argument of.
Well, he's coming on the podcast next week. It's good.
Nice.
You can ask.
The idea that a monarch actually allows for kind of a strange form of anarchism at the lower levels of society, because they are not rulers of each other. They don't have a vote over each other. They don't have anything like that. And so all of the liability and all of the decision-making is on the monarch. And so if the monarch messes up, the people rise up and cut off the monarch's head or something like that. And so you end up with, in kind of a funny way, the freest system, because basically the monarch doesn't care about you because you don't have anything to give them. You don't have a vote, in the same way that every member of Congress cares intently about every decision you make, because you are, in a weird way, their lifeblood, because they're taking your money and they're taking your votes.
So why are you curious?
So what I'm saying is, I'm not sure that democracy is what leads to the maximum freedom. In fact, I suspect that it could be possible that democracy leads to the minimum freedom.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what Curtis Yarvin would say.
Right.
And this is kind of what Michels gets at, too, is that you are sort of, by having more freedom, you're impinging yourself more because you have more duties necessary.
Yep. Thaddeus Russell writes about that at the beginning of the Renegade History, the first two chapters, the freedom and slavery and the slavery and freedom.
Maybe we should have read those.
Yeah, I mean, if you're courageous.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's funny, courageous, after we read Nietzsche and Foucault.
I mean, he writes about the freed slave groups that were petitioning the U.S. government to reinstate slavery.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's like, people don't want to face that.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to face that. I'll let somebody else face that. Somebody with more...
Yeah, I mean, he got fired.
Thaddeus Russell did?
Oh, yeah.
For that, you think?
Not for... Actually, the book had been out a while, but it was just... He just was not accepted.
Yeah.
Teaching the wrong stuff.
Yeah. No, and I mean, and sorry, I feel like I'm hammering you on the anarchy thing too much on this episode, but it's just because, I mean, a lot of it I thought addressed what
I think
we were
so.
talking about. And this was the reason I wanted to read it, because just show you basically where I got all my arguments from.
Oh, I thought you were going to say, show me the error of my ways.
No.
So what I'm interested in from your perspective, is what do you think what is the wisdom coming out of Michels here? Like, what do we take from it? What's important to take from
awareness that oligarchy is going to happen regardless. I think that's just a really powerful thing, because so much, I mean, myself included, so much of what many of us rail against now is the bureaucratic state in the U.S. But it's understanding that this would happen in any system. It's not to say that we should be content with it, but it's to understand that it's not meaning that we should throw the whole system out. Because that's where I start to push back against when people are like, look at, all of these sort of entrenched interests that have come up, and basically rule Washington. And my point is, like, that's going to happen in any situation, any sufficiently powerful nation. So we just need to be aware of that and understand that how it works and how power is transferred. And so he gives examples of how leaders are overthrown, right? And it's two kind of fundamental ways. Let me find it. I know it's another two. I'm sorry, Antushka. So the first way, in the first place, and this is on page 142, in the first place, if a division occurs among the leaders, one section or both is forced to seek help from the masses of the membership and is able to organize their strength. So actually, you were saying, I actually think this is the Trump example.
Yes.
Because I would say Trump is actually part of the oligarchy, and then he basically went against them, which is why they hate him so much,
right?
And among other reasons, obviously. And then went to the masses, the deplorables, and the rest is history. So the opposition leader is sometimes successful in eliminating the older leadership. So now in the second place, that was the last sentence for the first leader. Second is new leaders may and do arise, as it were, spontaneously out of the masses. So
right.
I don't know. I'm trying to think what the example, I guess Obama would be potentially what some people might say, although I know there's...
Spontaneous?
Well, he did kind of come out of nowhere. I mean, he was like 2004.
But he was kind of groomed for it his whole life. He's like a Trudeau guy.
That's true. Yeah, he went to Harvard and everything like that. Yeah. So I don't know. Napoleon? Maybe Napoleon.
Maybe. I actually don't know Napoleon's biography very well.
So he was born in Corsica, and it's actually kind of interesting because Corsica was bought by the French monarchy during Napoleon's dad's time. So it was like, so it was brought into the kingdom relatively recently after Napoleon was born, or maybe during he was born. My memory on this is hazy. So it's just interesting because then he was sent to the mainland to basically learn how to be a noble. But he was so he was obviously more aristocratic. He was an aristocratic Italian, but he wasn't an aristocratic Frenchman. You know what I mean? And at least in the biography I listened to, it was talking about how he was sort of an outcast a little bit and stuff like that. And then certainly he says that he was the will of the people and like he embodied the democratic revolution. I mean, he said that all the time.
Right.
And so in that sense, he certainly manipulated that idea that he was spontaneously arising out of the masses.
Right.
But fair enough. I mean, honestly, yeah, maybe. I mean, it's a good question. And I don't think he gives examples. He just sort of says this. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Well, because I start thinking of examples and then I start thinking like these tend to be people who actually come from a lot of power and end up using that power to wield power over, quote, the masses. Like you think Che Guevara or Lenin or Castro or people like this.
Actually, Lenin's a good example. Lenin is probably a very good example of the second type because Lenin was not from an aristocratic upbringing. He was from a very middle-class upbringing. Everybody also said how he basically had the look of a Russian peasant, too.
Nice.
Which sucks for me because honestly, I think I have some Lenin. Like I look at my hairline and Lenin's, and I'm like, oh my god. It's like that. And he was part Swedish, so I mean, for all I know. Anyway, so moving on. I in no way endorse Lenin, by the way.
Nice.
But he was very much, he wasn't part of the noble group, and
right.
his, we talked about this, his brother got killed by the Tsar and all that stuff. And so maybe Lenin and like Stalin and Mao's a good example too. Kind of. But anyway, okay. And then, yes, and I just think this is great. The existence of an opposition is the firmest and the only firm check on the autocratic tendencies of the leaders. Because that's kind of the last point, is that leaders naturally have autocratic tendencies. As we were saying, they're going to naturally try to consolidate power and get away from the reaches of the masses.
I also liked the bit about convincing the masses that there is an opposition when there isn't, the fake opposition idea.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that feels just like our current government system.
Yeah, manufacturing consent, man.
I like the Michael Malice thing about how conservatives are just liberals going the speed limit. About how you can bet that everything that everybody on the left is talking about today, 10 years from now, all the Republicans will be talking about that, and the Democrats will be onto something way crazier.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
So what did you think of this?
I liked it. It was fun.
You did? Okay.
To me, it's kind of obviously true, other than the ending where he says, and therefore democracy is what you should strive for. But that's like a value difference. I agree with the conception that all organization tends towards oligarchy, and all oligarchy will build on itself and try and gather more power.
Yeah.
And when it says all, I don't know if it actually is all in every example, but basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and to get back to your point of like, what do we do with this information? I think it's another reason why it's like potentially term limits for bureaucratic people within the state. It's like right now you could work at the State Department in a non-elected position for 30 years, And this is actually something that Machiavelli writes about in The Prince. He explicitly is like
right. He likes term limits.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it Curtis Yarvin who doesn't like term limits? Somebody doesn't, because they have an interesting argument about that.
Yeah, I could see it being him if he's a monarchist. So.
Right. The idea that actually what term limits incentivize is taking as much power as fast as you can.
Yeah.
Versus a true monarchic system that is legacy. It's going to pass on to your children. You actually do not have an incentive to ruin your country, to pass on to your children a mess.
Yeah.
You have an incentive to pass something good onto them versus somebody who isn't passing anything on to anybody they care about. It's just a 2-year position. They're going to try and get as much as they can out of it, and it doesn't really matter if they ruin it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you could also look at it the other way, whether it's out of bad things out of malice or stupidity, because it's like also the benefit to being somewhere for 30 years is you get good at the job, right?
Right.
And there's, expertise is basically, if nobody realizes now, if you don't have expertise, that's right. Really the name of the game. It's
this other thing. Bill Burr used to joke about this. And I also think it's an interesting idea because people argue that politicians get paid too much. And I think it's maybe they get paid too much by the wrong sources, but probably they get paid too little for the actual job that they're doing. And so they get really good at getting money from other sources, but they don't actually value the job that they're supposed to be doing. Right. And if they got paid, they have an important job. They get paid handsomely for that job. They take pride in being able to do that job well. And they have less of an incentive to go sniffing around corrupt sources for money.
Yeah. These are all interesting thoughts and good questions.
I don't know because we haven't tried it, so I don't know if it would work.
Yeah. Well, and it gets at the idea that, this is what Thomas Sowell says. There's something There's always it's only trade-offs basically.
There are no solutions, only trade-offs.
Yeah. Because also we humans are conniving, and so any system you make, somebody's going to figure out how to game it. I mean, that's just unfortunate.
Yes.
But that's just the fact. So
I think that's
so
true.
yeah. Yeah, no, but I'm glad that you liked it. And oh yeah, so the Rousseau quote.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that was interesting because, in some sense I actually do think I agree with it. But so it's on 131. So we're talking about democracy. For democracy, however, the first appearance of professional leadership marks the beginning of the end. And this, above all, on account of the logical impossibility of the representative system.
Right.
So, excuse me. So this is basically what Rousseau's saying. He defines popular government as the exercise of the general will. So, and draws from this the logical inference, it can never be alienated, and the sovereign, which is simply a collective being, can be represented only by itself. So consequently, at the moment when a people sets up representation, it is no longer free, it no longer exists, and for the will of people is not transferable, not even the will of the single individual.
Right.
Yes.
I agree.
Yes, I know. I know you do. But you know what Rousseau's writings led to, Mr. Antushka? Yeah. Well, anyway, I think that's probably pretty established that Rousseau's writings underpinned the French Revolution.
Right.
Yeah. So, but so did Locke, I would say, probably to some extent.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, because I obviously don't agree with that completely. Or I agree with it, actually. I do agree with it, but I don't think that that's the reason not to have representation. This is the thing I think I just accept that there's going to be some things as soon as I decide to have somebody represent me that I'm just giving up freedom in that sense.
Yeah.
But it is the risk I take by living in a comfort of this society.
Right.
Which I'm okay with, Antushka.
I think you're giving your choices a lot of credit there. I think you live in the society, and that's not just you. I think most of us live in the society and then rationalize why that society is inevitable.
Absolutely.
I don't. Sorry, I'm not picking on you.
I agree completely. But you're right. It's like I have to live in. If I'm going to be happy,
right,
and which I am relatively, right, and I'm going to reconcile this somehow logically. I mean, it's like this is the thing. But I do think I think about the state of nature more than the average person, and actually try to reconcile. Like seriously, it's just so many of these people that talk about like wanting to burn down society. I'm just like, what does that look like to you? It's like, how are you going to be how sure are you that you're going to survive that? Because I think most people. Right. I mean, just based off of the people that would die if we just stopped some of the medications that people have to take routinely. Like if that infrastructure alone went away. Tons of people would die.
Yep.
I mean,
but the problem is here. Sometimes you've put yourself in a situation where there is no easy way out. And I'm not necessarily just talking about medications, but the medical establishment to me is a mess.
Yes, I would agree.
Regardless of why you think it's a mess or whose fault or whatever. Yeah, it's definitely not functioning as well as it could be.
No, and nobody's happy
and the
with
fact that by pushing in directions to try and make it function better, you're going to end up hurting people. It's a huge problem. How do you get out of that? It's like the problem of enabling a family member who's on drugs or something like that. And if you stop paying them money, then they're going to be on the street, and that's going to hurt. Yeah. It's this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, Antushka, it would seem the way to overthrow the current medical establishment would be either for a leader within the medical establishment to arise or a leader within the masses to arise. Just saying.
Maybe Trump.
Maybe Trump.
He should try and get a job at a hospital.
Yeah. By the way, this is a nonpartisan podcast, of course. We are talking.
I'm not a Trump supporter.
No, yeah, me neither. But I just want everybody to be clear. We're not we're talking about politics, from a meta perspective here.
Right.
Because honestly, we're millennials and we're tired of the last 8 years.
Tired of it.
Yeah, honestly, it's just I'm tired of having politics be your end all be all identity. And I honestly think this is something that we sort of inherited from our parents, or at least I certainly did. And I'm trying to sort of fight against. So anyway, with that being said, did we get through everything? I know we went long, but I don't even know. I think we got everything, yeah.
I think so.
It was good, though. There were a lot of points I wanted to bring up.
I highlighted a lot of stuff, but I think we covered most of it. I think it's a very reasonable argument he's making.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I was re-listening to some of the Nietzsche ones. I thought we did a good job with Nietzsche.
I agree. I think that might be our best mini-series.
Might be. It's doing well, too.
I was also thinking that we've been doing 3-3-3. I think we can do longer and shorter. I think varying it, doing an article, doing one episode on something, or if it's a really long book, doing, 5.
I agree with that. Yeah. And we don't have to be set to this format. Because actually I've been throwing a bunch of things that I want to read at you, like that one article about the Lamo reticular activating system.
Right. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to contribute to that. I read it, I go, yes, of course.
Yeah. And then, and also
some Hildegard.
Hildegard of Bingham. Yeah, I want to read some Hildegard because
I'm excited about that one.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because she has a treatise on medicine. So
yeah, as far as I know, she's the first person to write about the female orgasm.
Really?
I think so. Yeah, she writes about sex.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is wild because she's a nun.
That is wild. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Huh.
Yep. Yeah, she writes about crazy stuff.
Where was she born? I guess we'll talk about that once we get to it.
Yeah, we'll get there. But,
yeah. So do you know what you want to do? Because we
could do some Rose Wilder Lane, maybe.
Yeah, I would be down for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool.
So she's funny because she is Laura Ingalls Wilder's daughter. Mm-hmm. So did you read? We talked about this maybe. Did you read that stuff in school? Little House in the Big Woods and all that.
Yes.
Right. So that's her daughter,
I liked them.
And she was like a massive individualist. She hung out with Ayn Rand and that crowd, and she met Mises, who was her hero, and they had coffee, and then she just became disgusted at some point because something she said made her think that he supported democracy, and she sent him this letter saying I can no longer associate with you. Because I can't bring myself to be friends with somebody who would be such a socialist as to support democracy.
That's hilarious.
And then he was like, no, you misunderstand me. I don't support democracy.
I hate democracy. That's funny.
All these people.
Yeah. Would you say he was an anarchist?
Mises?
If you had taken his... Yeah, I don't know enough
about
him.
Probably like an ANCAP, an anarcho-capitalist would be... Probably close to Murray Rothbard, sort of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
As opposed to Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell and the whole Chicago school.
Right, they're libertarians?
Yeah, I mean they're not anarchists. They believe in a function of government and a certain amount of taxation.
Right. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, once you sort of know what you want to read, let me know so I can.
Yeah, she has a book laying out her philosophy, and the first chapter is kind of interesting because it's an argument about how we all believe in God, which is not something I hear from most libertarians.
No, yeah, not at all. I don't hear that.
It's a kind of an interesting argument about how I think we've talked about it, but sort of like action in and of itself displays a belief in God.
Nice. Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, so we can do that one.
I guess I would say will, but maybe that's what she means by action.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to read it and find it.
Yeah. So that sounds good.
Yeah. What should we do next in this?
Yeah. So Pareto. I think we'll end it with Pareto.
All right. Exciting. What's this called? The nature of social action.
Yes. So, yeah, I think he goes into. Yeah, I think he goes into all like the lions and the foxes again and stuff like that.
Nice, cool.
It's a good one. All I remember is that this was my
social
my
utility. One. Oh wow. Okay.
Uh-oh. Yeah. Yeah, and of course, I think it is Pareto of the Pareto principle that, whatever 20% of people do 80% of the work stuff. Which you could see how the iron law of oligarchy kind of works
right.
into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like a different way of saying the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Yeah. And yeah, our listenership, I think it's slowly going up, actually.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. So we reached
so you listeners, keep on
yes,
keeping on.
and thank you. And
tell your friends; they'll love it.
Yeah. Maybe.
It's pretty funny when musicians I know are like, "Oh, I hear you drew a podcast. Why haven't I been on yet?" And it's like, "Well, I don't do that one really anymore, and I don't know if you want to be on this one."
That's funny. Yeah. Oh, well, but that might get people wanting to come on it more. That's funny though. So people it's interesting though, because I feel like you've told me how people have come up to you asking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Nobody's come up to me, but I keep it pretty DL.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, that's not true. Actually, I had a friend who was listening. Yeah, actually.
Nice.
Anyway, doesn't matter though. Cool. Sweet. All right. Well, I think we did it. Then,
Well,
cool.
I think, and Brother X should be our first.
Oh yes,
guest.
Agreed. Yeah, actually, I'll talk to him about that and see, because we should probably get on organizing that. Maybe do it. I guess we could almost maybe do it around the holidays if you'll be in town. We're doing that the show that we normally do.
Christmas time?
Yeah. So,
I don't think I'm coming up for Christmas.
I thought you were.
No, I'm coming up for Thanksgiving.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then. Okay.
Too many gigs at Christmas.
I get it. Okay. Cool. Well, yeah, because I was just thinking of in-person thing, and we should do an in-person episode. I should come over to Austin or vice versa.
Yep.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Cool. Man.
All right.
Sweet. See ya.
Bye.